and welcome to Circle Time, the earliest podcast. I'm Glenn Denny. Now, many of you may have heard of something called Pikler, like lots of talk about Pikler triangles and things. If you're a bit like me, it absolutely bamboozles me. I'm not entirely sure what it is. I just know it's something I should know. So I'm delighted that my guest on this edition of Circle Time is the very lovely Rachel Tapping. Rachel, welcome to Circle Time.
Thank you very much, Glenn.
So what is Pikler? What is Pikler, I suppose?
Well, I guess we should start with who was Pikler. So,
Okay.
Dr. Emmi Pikler was a Hungarian pediatrician. Um, so there's a lot of stuff out there that you can find to read more about her. I won't spend too much time talking about her necessarily, but she was a remarkable woman who started off training as a pediatrician, worked for 10 years with families, working in a preventative way, so going
Mhm.
in and seeing families every week and to help them with their children and the relationships with their children, the care of their children. And she then, after the Second World War, she was invited to open an institution for children from birth to three, whose parents either couldn't look after them anymore or who had unfortunately died.
Mhm.
And this she did. Um, and based on all of her experience and her ideas about how children can be looked after and cared for with great respect and trust, um, she developed her approach. We call it the Pikler approach.
Mhm.
So she developed her approach more and more through the institution. She was determined that children who were living there wouldn't come out the other end hospitalized or institutionalized.
Mm.
She felt sure it was possible for these children to come out the other end with all of the skills, social skills, emotional skills, and all of the sort of the play, movement that every child should have the opportunity to have in their home environment. And she during the course of, well, she the Pikler Institute then much later has now turned into a daycare center,
Mm.
and they run parent-child groups, but it still continues now to this day, this work. And the approach has evolved along with all of the up-to-date science, which backs it up beautifully, and has really lasted. And it's it's an interest. I mean, what got me interested in the
Mhm.
approach was the fact that, we all think that we're respectful to our children. And as a mother of three myself, I was drawn to it. I also ran parent-child groups. I learned about the approach whilst doing a course. And what really got me was the beautiful relationships that you could see in some of the film that came out of there,
Mhm.
between the caregivers and these children. Um, and Pikler was one of the things that that she's really known for is this idea about building these relationships where the children are trusted
Mhm.
themselves. So they're trusted to develop naturally in the right environment.
Yeah.
So whether that's to do with their movement development or the way they play, uh, through these relationships that are built with the caregivers, they have the opportunity to be themselves, to express themselves, and to really get to know themselves as human
Mm.
beings. Yeah.
That there's a lot more to it. I mean, I have to say, when you were talking about like the not being institutionalized, I mean, I'm a child of the 70s and growing up, I remember some of the shocking news footage came out of these orphanages in Romania, and I kept thinking, well, did they have it was obviously they didn't have the Pikler approach. It was just just put them in, do their basic needs, and that'll do. Whereas the Pikler approach is so much more, wasn't it? Particularly, it was care, like you said, it was because you used the term caregivers rather than adult or whatever. It was caregivers, and I think that's kind of an underpinning part of her work, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. So, with children thrive in an environment where they are loved and cared for.
Hmm.
So, you've got the whole thing with, say, Maslow's triangle, they're the
Yeah.
basic needs, and then these, other slightly lesser needs. But she provided all of it through this place that she created. She started off with qualified nurses. She was given a
Hmm.
pick of qualified nurses at the time, nursery nurses, and she tried working with them for a while. And after I think only literally a few months, she sacked the lot because they were so stuck in their ways of like, this is how you care for children and
Hmm.
for babies. And they wouldn't relearn, they wouldn't
Yeah.
unlearn what they already knew. And she then got a selection of very young women who hadn't really worked with babies before, but who she could train. And part of the caring aspect is, I mean, there are so many things that babies need, aren't there, to do with their intimate care
Hmm.
and being fed and being put down for naps and sleeps and these things that are often thought of as just the things we have to do to babies. We have to feed them, we have to get them to sleep, and we have to change their nappies, for
Hmm.
instance. And she could totally transformed my view of how these things are done. I
Hmm.
mean, obviously I would always try and be loving and caring for my own children. But when you see the way that the children respond to the caregivers at the Pikler House, it's just incredible. There's something about how the care is well, so they worked on having a sort of what we call a choreography of how, say, a nappy change would go, so that every child would know what to expect from the caregiver.
Yeah.
I mean, on the whole, they would have what we now would term a primary caregiver, someone, so it'd be one or two people who
Hmm.
would be the only ones who would really do their care. Um, but they would always do it in the same way, in the same order, so that the child would know what was coming next. And the child
Hmm.
could then learn that, trust in it, relax, and cooperate. Even the
Hmm.
very youngest babies, once they had got used to this way of having things done, would cooperate. If you want to I don't know, take off a certain sleeve first when you're undressing the child. Once they know that that's the one they do, they will actually lift their arm and or
Yeah.
start. You can see the impulse towards allowing and cooperating, and this grows into a beautiful relationship over time, where the child is responding to the caregiver and the caregiver is responding to the child. It's just really beautiful, actually.
Yeah, it's that two-way trust, isn't it? I know with my own setting, when we're doing, the intimate care side of things, it's, we always talk that I have it written into my policy that we always talk, it's an ideal learning opportunity as well, but it's a time for like communication and trust and all of that. So, we listen to the child, particularly if they're a bit older and they can talk and they can tell us. And if they don't particularly want one person, they want another person to change, we'll listen to that. And if it's possible, if the other person isn't, say, doing kitchen duties or snack duties or whatever, then it was like, yeah, of course you can have so and so to change a nappy. That's fine. And we listen to them. One of our children particularly doesn't want to go up and change a mat, but would prefer to be changed on the mat on the floor. And we're listening to that and giving that respect. And that's kind of a little bit going on there from Pikler, is it? That there's that two-way trust.
Yes, definitely two-way trust. I mean, one of there are lots of, I mean, so sticking with the sort of nappy changing scenario, um, uh, I mean, babies often, they get to a point where they've learned to roll over, for
Mhm.
instance. On a Pikler changing table, which is actually a thing that you can get, which is a nice kind of adult level table with sides to it.
Right, yeah.
The child is there, they've got sort of like it's almost like a little fence, bars around three sides,
Mhm.
so that the child can move freely whilst having their nappy changed. I mean, obviously, there are times when you need a child to be still while you clean off the poo. Um, but a child who has learned to turn over is allowed to turn over instead of this kind of trying to pin them down or trying to get them to stay in one
Mm.
place and rush through it all. Nappy change might take 20 minutes, and that's fine because it is this, and especially in daycare, uh, and of course in the institution as it was then, these moments of care are sometimes the only one-to-one times that the
Yeah.
children get with their caregiver. And so they're crucial to the child for building that relationship. And there was someone, I can't remember who it was, I'm afraid, who wrote about a love cup. I don't know whether you've heard that
Hmm.
expression. These moments of care, the moments of togetherness with the caregiver, are the times when the child's love cup is filled. They get the attention, they get the relationship, they get acknowledged, their feelings and their needs get acknowledged in those times. And because it's done very slowly, there's the opportunity for them also to do this cooperating.
Hmm.
And once the nappy change has been completed and the child is still happy and still relaxed and there's not any crying or sort of like, let's get this done as quickly as possible, they're ready to go on to the next thing or back to the play space or whatever it is that they need. Um, and then the child is feeling satisfied. They've had their needs fulfilled, all of their needs, not just a clean nappy, but all of
Yeah.
their needs fulfilled. And um, and the caregiver has had a lovely time with the child, and so they're feeling good as well. And then they can both move on to whatever the next thing is. And because the child is satisfied, they will then play happily for, some period without the need for more interaction from the adults. So it also kind of frees up the adults. There are so many benefits for the children, but also great benefits for the caregivers in the Pikler approach because it allows us as the adults to be mindful, to be just doing what we're
Mm.
doing, not to be having to be doing lots of things at the same time, and to know that we've completed a task as well to the best of our ability and are able to move on. Yeah, there are so many aspects. Like I said before we started, I could talk about it for hours, and it's quite hard to kind of focus on one thing. But yeah.
No, that's interesting. Yeah, I'm listening to you there, and I'm picking up so many parallels to what I've done in my current setting and my previous setting as a manager, and it's those bits I'm like, oh, actually, yeah, that kind of works that way. So maybe somewhere along the line, I've, brought in and it's subconsciously gone in about the Pikler approach. I mean, like you were saying about kind of an unhurried approach to this kind of intimate care and filling up that like their love cup that you like you said there. It's interesting. There was one setting I had where we had heaps and heaps and heaps and heaps of nappies. We had an awful lot of 2 and 3 year olds that were still in nappies. But we took it, so we switched it around. So we had two people that would do it. So the process was slowed down. And yes, it probably took all morning, but you were getting that one person that would change the nappy and take whatever time they needed, swap over to the next person who would do the next child, and back and forth like that. And again, that child choice as well, which was so important because the child has to have a say in who's doing this as well.
Yes, I mean, settings vary in how they're organized, but I mean, when I've heard stories, which hopefully aren't so current now, of the sort of nappy changing being a bit like a production line, where it's like one after another, they've got to be done now, and they've got to be
Yeah.
done quickly. I mean, it chills me.
Mm.
Because I mean, but when I had my own children, I didn't know any better, and I hadn't yet discovered the Pikler approach. And and I remember times when I would really rush through it because the child would be crying because they wanted to turn over or they weren't happy or
Yeah.
with having to lie on their back to have the nappy changed. And so you would just do it as quickly as possible,
Hmm.
just to get it done so that you could go back to whatever you were doing. It wasn't treated as an important moment in the day. Um, on its own.
Yeah. It's an
And
important kind of emotional learning
yeah,
experience as well.
absolutely. And and again, sort of sticking with this theme of the sort of nappy change and the intimate care, it's an incredibly intimate uh
Mhm.
task or moment in the day to have a nappy change. And I think also that doesn't always sink in with people. Again, it's cultural. It's not. I don't blame anyone for that. But it is something I'm really passionate about. There's a lot of talk. I know you've had a guest on talking about children toilet training, and there's talk about how many children now suffer with constipation and with holding their stools and things
Yeah.
like that, and how children are moving out of nappies later and later. And whilst I totally agree that there are lots of issues around what children eat and whether they're drinking enough water and all of these kind of things, um, to me also there's another aspect that doesn't get looked at very often, which again through learning about the Pikler approach, I've really learned to appreciate, um, which is the fact that because this is very intimate care, if we rush through it, if we distract the child by dangling something in front of their face while we
Mm.
deal with what's down below, if we say things like, "Oh, that's really smelly," um, and we continue with this kind of attitude of get it done quickly. It's not very nice. Oh, what have you done? Oh, you stink. Which, I'm
Yeah.
not saying that's exactly what people say, of course, but, there is this aspect. And even if it's said jokily, children, I think, understand a lot more than people really acknowledge.
Hmm.
And they understand our attitude and they understand our expressions, the tone of voice and all of these kind of things. And if we are having this kind of negative attitude towards poo, for example,
Hmm.
then it's hardly surprising if, as they become more and more aware of themselves and what's happening with themselves, they don't want to let it out.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems logical to me that this is also part of the problem, and that's something that I've tried to talk to people about a lot because I think it is actually quite a large part of why children will hold their stools and they don't want it to come out because they know it's smelly and dirty, or somebody will talk about it over their heads, or do you know what I mean? They're
Mm.
not included in the process.
Yeah.
They don't know that it's natural that everybody does it and it's completely normal and we have to do it. It just becomes a big issue.
Yeah. It's interesting as well, again, listening to what you're saying there, and it's like we talked about this as a team. Like I said, when I rewrote our nappy changing policy, and I wrote it from the ground up, and that's something we talk about in there is we don't talk about having a poo as a negative thing. We don't say that they're bottom smelly, even in a joking manner, because it does have a negative effect on the child's emotional well-being. And it's interesting that we're talking about that because I've never really thought about it in that respect. I just think, well, yeah, it's just a negative thing, but actually linking it to other kind of research and practice, it's there, and it's nice that we're doing this because we're being respectful of the child. And I think that's the main bit for me is being respectful to the child. They might be small children, but they're still human beings.
Exactly. We're all human beings. It's something that we have to remember is it isn't a them and us. There's a lot of
Hmm.
othering that goes on, particularly with infants, when they're very small, before they start to really, engage as much
Hmm.
with other people. And there's also the whole aspect of consent. I mean, again, with the Pikler approach, consent is always needed
Yeah.
and nearly always given by the child because they know they have this trusting relationship.
Mm.
And there are also most likely connotations with consent moving forward in life. Again, if you don't want to have your nappy changed, but you're having it done anyway,
Mhm.
you haven't given your consent. And if you can't trust the adults who are the ones who are caring for you intimately to listen to you and to take notice
Yeah.
of your cues as a baby and then up to into toddlerhood, then that must have a knock-on effect as to whether you feel that you will be heard if you say no later in life.
Yeah, it's really important as well. There is, we kind of touching on another issue there of, you know, almost a little bit of misogyny and where, women aren't feeling able to say no. And boys are kind of being very testosterone mad and what have you. But actually, if we're teaching that about the rights and consent and everything else from such an early age, from smallest infants all the way up, then I'm not saying it will eradicate these problems. There's a lot of work to be done on that. But it is right that you need to be able to say, well, no, this doesn't feel right. Or, like, for example, like I said, if a child doesn't want me to change their nappy, they want one of my other team members to do it. That's fine. That's their consent. They have consented that, yes, I need my nappy changed. I don't want you today, but can I have so and so? That's fine. That's them giving consent.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think it's an aspect we talk about these things in the early years, but we
Hmm.
don't always include the very youngest
Yeah.
in when we talk about the early years. It sometimes only starts at 3 or two and a
Hmm.
half or something and doesn't necessarily include the very young ones. Um, I think because people don't feel that they maybe have the ability to express these things as well, but actually they do.
Yeah.
Just you have to really be able to observe them, to know them really well, to understand what their needs are and what cues they're giving.
Yeah, I was going to say being tuned into them. I think,
Yeah.
if a child, for example, a small baby is crying when I'm changing their nappy, then they're not comfortable. Maybe they're not comfortable with me. That's their way of telling me, but they don't cry with another member of staff. That's absolutely fine. That's right. Okay, they don't like me changing them, but if there's no option, yes, they will have to. If there's no other staff member free at the time. But if they're happier with another member of staff, that's fine. That's their consent, and they've gone, well, I'm happier with this person. I'm not so happy here. That's great. We need to be listening to that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
So I mean, we've talked an awful lot about the consent, but also, I mean, it does have a lot. I know we talked about nappy changing that, but it does have an awful lot to say about treating the child as an individual, as a human being. But what else is there within the Pikler approach that we need to kind of be mindful of, or where do we go with this? Where does it come into? What can we? There's so many questions. My mind is being blown at the moment, and this is wonderful. I love it when my mind is being challenged so much. It's great. What do we need to do as practitioners if we want to kind of get to know more about this approach?
Well, so the Pikler approach, so there's quite a lot of literature out there, and there are some great films. If you go to the Pikler Studio on Vimeo, that's the Hungarian website which has films in several languages that you can rent or buy, so that you can sort of see it in practice, and they're sort of teaching films and things. Um, there are a couple of great websites with lots of information, but really, so I'm currently the chair of Pikler UK. So we're a UK based organisation. We're actually currently going through an application to become a charity. Um, and we're trying to really support and promote the Pikler approach in the UK. And, we do events, we're conferences, sort of just reaching out. We also host training here on the basic level Pikler training, where we invite the Hungarian pedagogues to come over and they do a week's training on the basic aspects. So there are three or four, depending on how you look at it, main pillars of the Pikler approach. We've talked a bit about the care, the
Hmm.
respectful care. And the others are to do with free movement, so autonomous movement development, and
Yeah.
also kind of autonomous play activity, free play, child-led,
Hmm.
self-directed play. The fourth one that I like to add in is observation, because without observation, you can't really
Yeah.
do any of these things, really good quality observations. And so, as far as what people can do, I mean, it's it's not a method, so that it
Hmm.
isn't like, there are these steps and you can read about it and just kind of follow them. But at the same time, to me, it's actually a very natural approach because once you learn about it, you think, actually, this is common sense and
Hmm.
it's logic. It's actually, we are human beings. Human beings are born with the ability to, for instance, if we're looking at the movement element, um, like any animal, we are capable of getting from lying down to standing up without really any intervention. There is a young baby gradually learns how to control their limbs and then their head and
Hmm.
these various aspects. They start to experiment with movement. They start to turn and roll over. They go from rolling over to maybe crawling to sitting to pulling themselves up and standing. Now, this is the order in which they will do things on the whole. There are
Hmm.
always exceptions, of course,
Yeah.
if they're allowed to do it naturally in their own time. And this is something that hardly ever happens these days. We
Hmm.
have, because of the kind of top-down approach that is now so prevalent in society generally, where we're constantly trying to prepare children for something that they're not yet ready for.
Hmm.
This sort of top-down idea that
Yeah.
children, have to be ready for this, have to be ready for that. We're always sort of trying to push them, and we also, and it happens amongst parents as well, and with the best will in the world and all the love in the world, we
Hmm.
we want our children to achieve the next step and to get to the next milestone. It's exciting, it's lovely, and we can't help but compare our children with other children and all of these kind of things. And we worry if they're not doing something that somebody else's baby is doing.
Hmm.
But I mean, I've seen this in practice, many times over the years, and children who are allowed to lie on their backs, um, in a safe space, warm environment, and are just given interesting things around them to look at, to be interested in, to start to reach for, um, just begin to move naturally. Sort of stretching over to reach something is one of the things that you do that starts you sort of turning over.
Yeah.
And there's so much. I mean, one of our biggest bugbears is actually, it's a little controversial, but tummy time.
Hmm.
Tummy time is very much pushed by the NHS and many professionals because it's become something that we just do. And there
Hmm.
are lots of reasons given for why we should do it. But our belief is that it's more of it's like it's the cure rather than the prevention. I mean, we want to prevent children from having the problems that are created for which tummy time is a solution, if that
Hmm.
makes sense.
Yeah.
So, children who are allowed to develop naturally from their backs, turning to their fronts when they're ready, are much more able to develop their musculature because they are using what they're ready to use in the
Hmm.
time that they're ready. They're developing the strength and the ability, the skills that they need, so that once they are on their tummies, they're already holding themselves well. They're therefore not putting the strain on their necks that they do by having to
Hmm.
put them up. Their arms are free to move and do things instead of like being stuck underneath them because they've got to try and hold themselves up. There's a lot that goes on in with tummy time that is actually very stressful for a baby.
Mm.
And the reasons given for tummy time are usually to do with it being a sort of, again, well, so that people talk about babies getting a flat head if they're laid on their backs, or having difficulties with that. But we see a lot of children these days who are very much there. They don't move freely when they're lying on their backs because they have something over the top of them,
Yeah.
a baby gym or a mobile or something that holds their attention. So their heads are not naturally moving from one side to the other. And, heads that move naturally and roll gently on the floor will naturally shape as they should. So that's one aspect. There's a lot of what we call containerization as well these
Hmm.
days, which I think we're all aware of, the car seats and buggies and all, and even carriers and all of these things. Children are so, their movement is so restricted
Yeah.
for rather large parts of the day that they don't get to build all of this musculature and really develop it as human beings are designed to do. So yeah, so it's something that, we really like to um we'd like to have a discussion with people about this whole tummy
Hmm.
time issue, because it seems to me that we're doing our children a disservice by encouraging encouraging parents to put their babies on their tummies from a very, very early age before they're really able to do it.
Mm.
And free movement development, if you think about it, I mean, the Pikler Triangle, which you mentioned at the beginning,
Hmm.
is one of several items that Pikler designed with her colleagues to give children the opportunity to learn about their own ability and to develop their movement. It's often copied, and a lot of the Pikler triangles out there are not Pikler triangles. They're sometimes called that. Um, but it was quite a specific design with a single bar at the top and the sort of the board that comes off it. Um, and along with low platforms with sloping ramps, which you see in lots of places, and other sort of items, the movement development of the children in the Pikler house was very gradually sort of developing at sort of low levels. So they were able to take risks and move up something where if they did fall, it was a very, very short distance.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I mean it's again, it's a big topic, and I'm probably rambling a bit because I get very passionate about all of these
Yeah.
things. But the movement development is a really key part also for children's self-image,
Hmm.
because if they are able to find a position for themselves, to practice it, to grow their their confidence in holding themselves a certain way or in achieving a certain thing, it really builds their self-esteem
Hmm.
and gives them a sense of achievement. They practice and practice and practice, and then they do it. And we all know as adults how wonderful it is when you've been trying really hard to achieve something, whatever it might be. When you actually do it, you want acknowledgement because you go like, wow, yes, I finally did it.
Yeah.
And children need that as well. We need to give them the opportunity to have that, which they get through this movement development. Um, and we're not, and sitting a child, I did it, propping your child up to sit before they've
Hmm.
actually found out how to do it for themselves is another really, it's another really tricky thing because, we want our babies to be up so they can see more, they can see around, they've got this sort of upright sort of positioning, which seems more interesting and exciting, and they look like they're enjoying it because they probably are. But at the same time, what it's doing for their backs aren't ready for it quite a lot of the
Hmm.
time, so the muscles don't develop in the right way. Um, And also they get kind of stuck. You sit a child up
Yeah.
who doesn't know how they got there. There's only one way out, and that's usually falling over. And
Hmm.
so we end up having to be with them constantly, propping them up, putting things behind them,
Yeah.
all of these kind of things. There's so much that we create more work for ourselves and a certain amount of stress for the child, and the child becomes dependent on the adult.
There's that frustration, isn't there? I
Yeah.
know from being a manager in an outdoor nursery, we allowed the children, because we're an outdoor nursery, why shouldn't we, to climb trees?
Mm.
But we made sure we didn't lift them into the tree and lift them back down because they're not going to learn to do that safely. They're not going to develop the right muscles, and this is what you're saying about sitting babies up. It's the same principle that they need to learn that bit. They need to, I hate using the word, but I'm going to say it. They need to fail in order to succeed. They need that element of try, try, try again, and you will get it. They need to be able to, know that this hand needs to go here and then that they need the process. They need that whole process. And this is what's singing to me. This is just blowing my mind. I love a conversation like this.
Great. Yeah, and you're so right. And why not give that opportunity to babies? Why does it have to only be once they get to a certain age
Mhm.
when they are already running around or whatever? They need this right from the beginning. And the
Yeah.
balance and well, there's such balanced people at the end of it. Well, at the end of it, it's not the end anyway, is it?
No,
Because
know
it's
what you
the
mean.
rest of our lives. But through finding out how to go from this lying position to standing, walking, running around, if that is allowed to come naturally with just the support and accompaniment of the adult, but not the intervention, then the child knows who they are. They
Yeah.
know where they stop and the world begins, like they know they can feel the floor, they can feel themselves against something, they can learn what happens when I try this. And they will try things. And like you say, they have to be able to fail. We all have to, don't we?
Yeah.
If you don't have a failure, you can't learn. And these
Hmm.
children also, because of all the aspects, the free play as well that we haven't talked about yet, but the movement and the care and these great relationships, when they get to a point where, they're being asked to actually formally learn things, they are so ready
Hmm.
because they know who they are, emotionally, physically. They have a sense of themselves and their curiosity has been allowed to develop in a way that doesn't rely on an adult to ask a question, give an answer, show a way, scaffold everything. I mean, I'm not saying that the scaffolding isn't a useful resource, but it's just, I said earlier that it's logic, it's common sense.
Yeah.
I guess you can see that,
Yeah, I mean, there's various bits that I do in my practice that I've developed over time that I've gone from, like you were saying earlier about when Pikler brought in these nursery nurses, but they were so focused, they were so rigid. And I suppose back in that time, that's the way nursery nurses were. It was very starched, very upright and everything.
yeah.
But now it's like I think we're encouraged as practitioners to learn and to develop and to grow. And this is just, this is just amazing. I need to find out more. Unfortunately, we have kind of come to the end. Well, we're over time, and I don't care because this was just fascinating. There is obviously much more that we could talk about, but there is thankfully, like you say, there's information out there, and it's just this is absolutely fascinating. Rachel, thank you so much for this. This is brilliant.
You're very welcome, Glenn. And can I just very cheekily mention one thing that is
Of course.
there is actually some Pikler training coming up in London at the end of next month, and it's all about play and Pikler's approach to play. And play is so much in the news at the moment.
Hmm.
Great new Play Matters document that's been created.
Yes.
We would love people to come and find out more about Pikler from the horse's mouth. That horrible saying, but we have Pikler pedagogues coming over from Hungary to teach this course, and
Amazing.
details are on our website. So it would be wonderful if anyone's interested.
Absolutely. Yeah, I definitely want. What we'll do is once we've finished our recording, I will get as much information off you that I can put in the biog here as well. That'd be brilliant. So everyone can click the links and get that information, because there is, like you say, it's a huge topic. We could spend days and days talking about this, and
Yes.
I would be delighted. I don't know if I could actually save the file size for this one to send to the internet. Rachel, this has been simply an amazing talk, and I think definitely feel free. I would love to have you back as a guest again on Circle Time. But Rachel Tapping, thank you so much.
Thank you.